Okay, you probably noticed something a little bit different about today. We're not in the studio. No one's in their workplace at the moment. We're at home, not because we're having to self-isolate, because we're following government advice to work from home where necessary. So I'm in my quite small study. It's not a very interesting place. Lizzie looks like she's in Buckingham Palace.
I'm definitely not in Buckingham Palace. I'm in my very small flat in South London.
So you're in your flat, I'm in my house, and we're going to still try and do a Royal Rota. I mean, listen, what a week it's been. Everything has changed really since we last did this podcast. It's a pretty unique situation for so many people, a worrying situation for so many people, particularly if you are on the front line. And, you know, listen, we're going to base this around coronavirus. What else is there to talk about? And there's been some significant developments on that front. Lizzie's going to do the rundown, but, you know, bear with us. Welcome to this version of the Royal Rota. As ever, it's on YouTube. Just search Royal Rota ITV. It's on Spotify. It's on whatever podcast platform you need. Just search Royal Rota ITV. And as ever, Lizzie's going to do her Robinson's Royal Rundown. Go for it, Lizzie.
Yeah, the one thing that is still the same is I will talk you through what's happened in the last week. The Royals have been notably quiet. There was one engagement, but we haven't seen very much of them, although there is quite a bit of royal news to run through. So the week started with a visit by the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge to a 111 call centre in Croydon, and that was to thank frontline staff who are working tirelessly to take calls during this coronavirus outbreak. Talking of coronavirus, Prince Charles, we found out, has tested positive.
That was pretty big news.
Virus. Yeah, the Duchess of Cornwall has tested negative though, which is good news. And on Sunday in the UK, we celebrated Mother's Day, and the Cambridges marked that with some lovely photographs, including Prince George's Mother's Day card to his mum, Kate. And they put up a very nice message, which kind of reflected the fact that lots of families couldn't be together at the moment because of coronavirus. So
and yeah, no one is together, are they? For obvious reasons. Should we do with the big news first?
Yeah.
The heir to the throne in the UK has got coronavirus. I mean, when I got that news, to be honest with you, Lizzie, when I got that news, and it came via one of our communications with the palace, I didn't actually believe it. I just thought maybe someone's hacked this person's phone and sent out an erroneous message. I had to kind of double check before I put that out on Twitter. You know what it's like when you've got breaking news. Your instinct is to get it out as quickly as possible. But certainly on this one, I went, whoa, I'm going to hold back for a couple of seconds to check it's actually true.
It just sort of proves, doesn't it, that nobody is above getting this virus that has affected so many people across the world. And obviously the Prince does meet and comes into contact with a lot of people, whether that's on engagements or private meetings. And in the period that coronavirus has been in the UK, he's met a lot of people.
Let's just run through the timetable, because actually this has been quite interesting, hasn't it? And we've got some pictures. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see the pictures. If you're listening on a podcast, then, well, you'll have to imagine them. But it was on the 10th of March, wasn't it, where he had a charity water aid summit in London, and he was sat opposite Prince Albert of Monaco, who just a few days later confirmed that he tested for coronavirus. Now, we don't know where Prince of Wales got it from, who he was infected by, and Clarence House were very clear to say, look, he meets so many people, it's impossible to say. But that's got to be, Prince Albert of Monaco, it's got to be one of the potential people that could have passed on the infection.
He could, although he has come out this afternoon and said that at no point did he and Prince Charles shake hands, that they were at different sides of the table. So he obviously trying to distance himself from infecting the prince.
But
But
equally, we don't. I mean, from everything we read about coronavirus, and we're not medics, but you could sort of hand over a bit of paper, couldn't you, across the table? Who knows? And that could have transmitted part of the infection. We simply don't know how he got it. But then, if you go through that, so that was the 10th of March, and then on the 11th, he had that Prince's Trust engagement at London Palladium, which was the first time where he saw Prince Charles not only offer his hand and then suddenly catch himself and then hold back, and he spent the rest of the time doing, as we discussed in the podcast last week, the Namaste.
He did, yes. And then when we saw him along the line meeting, famous faces, Anton Deck, Craig David, he again wasn't shaking their hands. He was being very careful. But he was meeting a lot of people that day as well.
Yes, I mean, and he went down the line, lots of namaste, but again, just such a busy place, and it doesn't, it might not be one of the celebrities that had it. It could have been anyone in that auditorium. He could have picked it up from touching a banister or a cup or a glass. We simply don't know. But it comes back to that point. Here is somebody whose line of work involves meeting people over and over and over again. And as far as the timetable concerned, the 12th of March, wasn't it, was particularly busy for the Prince because he had lots of things that day.
He did. He had an investiture at Buckingham Palace, after which we know that he saw the Queen briefly. And that evening he was at a dinner at Mansion House, and that was a relief for the relief effort around the Australia bushfires. And the pictures that we saw of him in that room at that dinner, I mean, it's absolutely ram-packed full of people and people surrounding him. But they are saying that the 13th is a key date because doctors' most conservative guess is that he was unlikely to have been infectious himself until the 13th of March. So the day after he saw his mother.
That's a conservative estimate about when he will be at his infectiousness. But it's only a day's difference. You've got the 12th, he's seeing the Queen. He's at Buckingham Palace. He's doing that investiture. Okay, he didn't touch anyone's hands. He went to that fundraiser for the Australian bushfires. On the 13th, one day later, 24 hours later, 12 hours later, be what it may, he becomes infectious. I don't think you can necessarily completely rule out on medical grounds that he wasn't infectious on the 12th when he saw the Queen.
Yeah, although I think they were
guesswork and supposition, but
I think doctors the doctors that was their most conservative guess, was the 13th. So I suppose I'm not a medic, so we have to take their word for that.
But a little close for comfort, perhaps, is what we could conclude from all of this. One of the people that he met when he was at the event was a TV presenter. To people in the UK, she's very well known, Floella Benjamin. She's now in the House of Lords, so she's called Baroness Benjamin. She actually was getting, you can have a look at the pictures here, she was getting a damehood, wasn't she, from the Prince when she was there. And we caught up with her on Skype. We can't do any interviews face-to-face at the moment, but we did catch up with her on Skype. We had a chat with her about what she thought. Okay, was she worried and all the rest of it? And what I thought was most interesting from her interview, and let's have a quick listen to some of it now, was how positive she was trying to be about the whole thing. She herself is 70, and therefore she's confining herself to her own house. But have a listen about how positive she was generally about life.
The whole nation at that time were a little bit worried. We weren't quite sure just how worried we should be, but I think everybody was a little bit concerned. That's why we did that handshake, not a proper handshake or a hug, but just did that kind of wonderful Indian handshake. I feel quite lucky in a way that I didn't get the infection. I think we've all kind of mingled. We've been on the tube, we've been at work, we've done all sorts of things where we could have easily have been infected ourselves and passed it on. But he, the Prince, I think he's a dedicated person like his mother, and felt he had a dedication to duty to meet all the people like myself on the 12th to do the investiture. And I was totally grateful because my family came with me as well, and we had a wonderful time and very uplifting time. So I think just because he's the Prince doesn't mean, he's any different to us. We're all in the same boat. We all have to be careful. And once we found that we have got it, we should self-isolate and listen to what the government is telling us to keep safe and keep the NHS safe and all the people who are looking after us safe.
So Floella Benjamin is not not having any symptoms, as she told me there. But again, I think, you know, as we've been saying many times here, the Prince meets a lot of people. Now, there's an issue with the whole matter of testing. We've dealt with the Queen and whether or not he was infectious when he saw the Queen. He went to Highgrove, his country residence in Gloucestershire, and then went up to Birkhall in Scotland, where anyone who doesn't know is on the Balmoral estate.
So he had his last official engagement, we know, is on that 12th of March, the day before they think he could have become infectious. And in that week, that period of time before he travelled up to Scotland, he was at Highgrove and was carrying out a small number of meetings in that time. He then travelled at the weekend to Birkhall, which is on the Balmoral estate, and they arrived there late on Sunday.
So this is last weekend we're talking about, isn't it? So the weekend of the 21st and 22nd.
Yeah. Then on Monday, the decision was taken to test him after he had shown some mild symptoms over the weekend. And then the test results came back late on the Tuesday, saying that he had tested positive and the Duchess had tested negative. And so they are now both self-isolating separately within Birkhall.
So they're in Birkhall, the house in Scotland. I mean, it's not a small house. I'm sure they've got plenty of room to self-isolate, but he literally is being on his own. He's not seeing the staff. He's not seeing his wife because she doesn't have coronavirus, according to the test. He does. Let's just talk about the issue of the test, because it didn't take long, did it? Oh, actually, minutes, really, for frontline medics, doctors, nurses, who in the UK, I don't know the situation elsewhere, but in the UK, they couldn't get tests for love nor money. And you think they're putting their lives on the line day in, day out to treat coronavirus patients. They all said, and I suppose you could argue with some justification, they understandably said, well, how is it that the heir to the throne showing mild symptoms, who's not in hospital, can get a test on the NHS, the public health service in the UK, and we can't? And there was a little bit of anger about that.
Yeah, there was anger around that. And all we've been told is that, yes, he was tested by the NHS in Aberdeenshire in Scotland, and that they say he met the criteria. They both met the criteria to be tested. We don't know how they've managed to meet that criteria. They won't comment on that, but we're just being told that they have.
Yes, and Scotland's chief medical officer, because the health service in Scotland is run by the Scottish government, not by the UK government. But the chief medical officer in Scotland, put out a statement, didn't she, and said, they passed the criteria. Now, what the criteria is pretty unclear, and I can't really square that circle, because she said they fulfilled the criteria to be tested for COVID-19 for clinical reasons. Now, if he wasn't showing severe symptoms, Camilla wasn't showing any symptoms, it's left a lot of question marks hanging about, well, are there underlying health concerns that you're clearly not telling us? And I think there probably are, is the conclusion we have to make from this, because the chief medical officer was on the radio in Scotland this morning. She's called Dr. Catherine Calderwood. And she said, look, there are things I can't disclose for reasons of patient confidentiality, completely understandable. But those were the reasons why they tested both the Prince and the Duchess.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't think they're going to comment officially any further on why they've tested them. They never comment on medical and health concerns around the royals. So I think that's as much as we're going to get in terms of comment from them.
The thing is, it might be a lot easier for them to say, look, he's the heir to the throne. If something happens to the Queen, he would be the next king. Of course we're going to test him. I mean, if they kind of said it that way round, maybe people might have understood it a bit better. I don't know. Let's just have a listen then. So one of the doctors, she's from an organisation called Doctors Association UK. It's basically a group of doctors who campaign for better treatment of doctors. She's called Samantha Batt-Rawden, and she told us, why she's concerned. In fact, this particular doctor is in her home. She's showing some sort of symptoms of coronavirus. She can't go onto the front line and help with this crisis because she's got symptoms, and yet she can't get a test, and therefore she was perhaps understandably frustrated that here we are, we have two members of the royal family who got a test, but she couldn't. Have a listen.
I'm really sad to hear about Prince Charles. Obviously, I send him my best wishes, as does the Doctors Association UK, and I wish him a speedy recovery, and I hope those symptoms do remain mild. I believe the threshold for testing is different in Scotland, and that Prince Charles did hit the criteria for a test, but it is not great for NHS staff, and it's probably dampened morale a bit, in that there are many of us who are off, who are poorly or off, who could otherwise return to work with a test. That, to see a member of the royal family being tested whilst doctors and frontline NHS staff are not.
So there we are. That was that Doctor Samantha. I have to say, a lot of my social media comments were reasonably negative. I think people are sort of concerned, but the fact that there's inequality over the testing, I think a lot of the notifications, certainly on Twitter, were at least, how should we put this, one eyebrow raised, maybe. That's kind of the response that I was getting. But Clarence House have said this morning that he's had a lot of well wishers.
Yeah, so we know that he's received hundreds of messages, kind of mixture of cards and digital messages, and they said this afternoon that he's enormously touched by all those kind words.
He got those kind messages, and then we saw him for the first time, didn't we, when the whole of the UK was doing the Clap for Our Heroes, which actually, I don't know what you thought, Lizzie, I thought was a really moving moment across the country last night, and the royals all joined in with it.
Yeah, we've seen this across various other countries in the last few weeks, but last night was the UK's turn, and at 8 p.m. Everyone came out across the country to clap for our carers, as the hashtag is here, and just to say thank you for everything they're doing at the moment.
Yeah.
That included some very famous faces, including some of the royals.
Yeah, and actually, there was the first time we've seen Prince Charles, wasn't it? Since the admission that he's got coronavirus, and he was on there. I think it was on Clarence House's Instagram stories of him just clapping there, and then a separate picture of Camilla, the Duchess of Cornwall, because where they are in Burke Hall, they're clearly not together. We discussed, but they still wanted to take part in the clap.
They did, yeah. They're obviously self-isolating at the moment because the Prince has tested positive and she's tested negative. So yeah, we saw Camilla waving out of a window and the Prince of Wales clapping in what looked like a study.
Actually, somebody said to me, shouldn't he be in his pajamas or something, like just called out of bed? But no, Prince Charles always wears a suit, even when he's got coronavirus, he's always in a suit.
Yeah, lots of people said that to me on Twitter, like, oh, always dressed properly, Prince Charles.
Yeah.
We saw 3 very sweet little people as well, didn't we?
Yeah, we did, and actually they clearly didn't keep them up until 8 o'clock, because wherever they were, it was a different time zone to the rest of us. I mean, when I went out of my house into my street and sort of started clapping, it was all dark, as we know. But then Kensington Palace released some pictures of Prince George, Princess Charlotte, Prince Louis, all clapping, presumably in the garden. It must have been at Amber Hall, filmed by the Duke of Cambridge, we understand.
Yeah.
So to have a quick look at this, we'll pause to look at the clapping, because there's a good 10 or 15 seconds here. Have a watch. And I think you'll agree, very sweet was that, wasn't it? Made us all feel very good. But not just Charles and Camilla, not just the 3 Cambridge children. Have a look at this picture, which appeared on the Royal Family web feed on their social media, and see whether you can guess where this is. Pretty obvious. So you might have guessed that was Windsor Castle, where the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh are. We didn't see them clapping, but wherever they were in the castle, they would have heard it, because that was pretty noisy. Someone clearly got their saucepan out and was banging on that.
Yeah, very good noise from Windsor Castle there. And down the road at Bagshot Park, which is where the Earl and Countess of Wessex live with their children, Lady Louise and Viscount Seven. They were also, they posted on their social media a little post of them clapping and a message from Prince Edward.
And one further point, actually, I mean, about the whole coronavirus thing is actually we've been talking, haven't we, about whether or not Prince Charles should have got a test and frontline medics can't. And actually, part of what's happened in some of the recordings of this podcast, the Prime Minister of the UK, Boris Johnson's gone and got coronavirus. He too got a test. Now, no different to Prince Charles, mild symptoms, didn't go to hospital, but still got a test. So, despite the debate that was raging on social media about whether or not the heir to the throne should have got one, well, the Prime Minister got one too.
Yeah, we've just found out just shortly before recording this that the Prime Minister's tested positive. So, and he again had mild symptoms similar to Prince of Wales, but he will now have to also self-isolate for 14 days.
And obviously question marks about when Boris Johnson last saw the Queen, because normally their weekly audience is face-to-face. We know they haven't been recently because of coronavirus. The last couple haven't, but we're trying to work out when Boris would have last seen the Queen face-to-face if he were also showing symptoms or whether he was infectious at that time.
Yeah, as you say, we know the last two audiences have been over the phone. This week's she was at Windsor Castle, and the week prior to that the audience was on the phone from Buckingham Palace. So that would have meant around, I think, the 11th of March would have been their last audience face to face, and before that they saw each other at the Commonwealth Day service at Westminster Abbey. Those pictures where we saw all the royal family together before Harry and Meghan left the UK.
And just so everybody knows how accurate your information is, whilst you were talking, we just had a communication from the palace that says the Queen remains in, quotes, good health. She last saw the Prime Minister on the 11th of March, as you yourself have just said, which is why everyone can always rely on what you say, and is following all the appropriate advice regards to her welfare. So there we have it. The 11th of March was the last time the Queen saw the Prime Minister, which was quite some time ago. So therefore, I think that rules out the fact that he would have been infectious when he saw the Queen.
Yeah, well, if we think that the Prince of Wales last saw the Queen on the 12th, and he was regarded as not being potentially infectious until the 13th, the Prime Minister saw her before that.
The one thing we haven't mentioned is that Buckingham Palace say that at no point did the Prince of Wales come in contact with his father, the Duke of Edinburgh, who moved straight from Sandringham to Windsor, and the Prince hasn't seen him. But, you know, if we're saying Charles and Camilla are in the at-risk group, one of them is 71, Camilla's 72, the Queen's 93, and the Duke of Edinburgh's 98, so they've got to be in the very highest risk category in terms of age.
Definitely, and we know they're following all the government advice, and they're now at Windsor, and, you know, the public can see that the Queen is well and healthy, but also it's showing that nobody is above taking this government advice of staying at home, which they've told us all to do.
I think my favourite image, or one of my favourite images of the year so far, is the Queen leaving Buckingham Palace last week when she was pictured with her dorgie, which we have now established is a dachshund and a corgi. Just looking at the tops and looking at, oh, we're off, are we, boss? And they're off to Windsor. So anyway, we know where the Queen is, we know where the Duke is, we now know where Charles and Camilla are. It's probably worth running through where William and Kate are at the moment.
Yeah, the Cambridges are... The Cambridges were in London, but they have moved to their home in Norfolk, Anma Hall. So they've got out of London and, moved to the countryside. So
yes. So William and Kate have. You were actually. We couldn't mention it last week, could we? Because you'd already been out with them to that NHS 111 call centre. And if you're not in the UK, you might know that we dial 999 for emergencies, the equivalent of 911 in America, and we dial 111 or 111 here for non-emergency calls. And it's that kind of call centre that they went to. And they really were, going there just to sort of thank the staff for the work they're doing. Their workload has been phenomenally high. And William and Kate went there. I do wonder, though, Lizzie, you were there, obviously, but looking back now, that was a week ago, wasn't it? Would that, it's odd to think that such a visit could have taken place, given that the UK is now in lockdown.
Yeah, well, the visit happened last Thursday, but we couldn't report on it until last Friday. And if you remember, last Thursday was the day that the Queen gave her message of solidarity to the nation. And I think the timing, if they had put out the Kate and William visit that day, they didn't want anything to sort of overshadow that Queen's message, I expect. But yeah, a lot has changed in the last week. We now are all told to stay at home. A lot has shut down in the country, which we are. A lot has shut down in the country. People not going into work. A lot of shops shut down. Restaurants, pubs, everything. But a week ago, things were still slightly different. And they were using this visit not only to sort of praise those who are working tirelessly on the front line for the NHS, but it was also to help with the messaging around when people should use 111 and when they should pick up their phone.
Don't call, use the internet instead, go online, don't inundate these operators with phone calls.
Exactly. The number of calls to 111 has quadrupled, and 999 had its busiest 3 days in history, the 3 days prior to their visit. And so I think part of what they were doing was to have conversations that were going to highlight exactly when people should use this service and when they should go online and seek advice there first. But it did, a lot of people said after they left, these people are working very long shifts, taking calls non-stop, and they said what a huge morale boost it had been to have the Cambridges there.
And two key bits of video was one where they came in and they sanitised their hands, as you would thoroughly expect them to do. And there was another bit, I think, where someone had approached the Duchess of Cambridge, went to shake her hand, and William immediately pulled her arm back. And I think it's just an acknowledgement of how much things have changed in the space of a week, that actually we kind of wouldn't consider doing that now. And even when we were in the office the other day, when we were all staying 2 meters apart from one another as best we physically can in an office, things have moved on a lot in a week, and I don't think anyone would sort of go to shake somebody's hand now, would they?
No, and they were, throughout the entire visit, they were incredibly careful. There was one occasion where you see them on camera sanitising their hands when they come in to meet the call handlers, but there was another occasion that you didn't see on camera, and they were very careful to keep the correct distance apart from people. They didn't do any handshaking. When they arrived, they met the chief executive. They didn't shake his hand. When they met the call handlers, there was no handshaking at all. And then they did have a conversation with the chief executive where William had actually said, going forward, they might have to look at basically virtual royal visits. So supporting them kind of like this, I suppose.
And actually, it's probably worth hearing actually from the chief executive, isn't it, as well as one of the call handlers that you spoke to, just about how the visit really did sort of raise morale. So the chief executive spoke about, the seriousness of the situation they're facing, and that was, a week ago, how things have changed. But I think there was a message of morale boosting, wasn't there, from the call handler.
Everyone knows what a fantastic job you guys are doing. They do.
People are incredibly concerned about displaying symptoms. Our message, though, is please, if you can, don't phone either of these lines.
It's like a pat on the back, thanks ever so much for doing this, and I think it just raises morale, really.
Okay, there's no other news around at the moment at all, is there? It's quite interesting, however, that there was on a piece of non-coronavirus news that Princess Eugenie, sorry, I pronounced the name wrong, Eugenie had her birthday in the week.
It did, and it was a big birthday. It was Eugenie's 30th. Right. So I suspect any celebrations for that will probably put on hold, and she'll perhaps celebrate when this is all over.
And obviously put her sort of wedding reception on hold in Buckingham Palace Gardens.
Other sister.
Yes, as I said, her sisters had to.
Not the same one. And there were various pictures posted around her birthday of her as a little girl. But she has also posted on Instagram this week a photograph from the Royal National Orthopaedic Hospital, and she says she's so proud of them as they have become a trauma centre for the first time since 1982 due to the incredibly challenging time we face and the unprecedented pressure all hospitals and their staff face. It has created a COVID-19 fund for staff that urgently need our support. There we go.
And that was the hospital where she had that operation when she was much younger, the scoliosis that she was suffering, and she had that sort of back operation, wasn't it? So the fact that hospital was having to upgrade itself, like so many others, into one to deal with coronavirus. I said actually this segment will be coronavirus free, but there you go. It wasn't. Just one final point then, Lizzie, on this before we wrap up. Do you think the Queen? A lot of people are saying, okay, she needed to give a statement. She gave a statement. Do you think we are motoring towards the point at which she might give some form of televised public address?
I think it's not out of the question that she would give a televised address, but I think it will be timed incredibly careful, much like the statement was. We only had the statement a week ago, and it's not going to happen. We're not going to hear from her every week during this. They're only going to deploy her at crucial times, and I think there'll be some distance between the two if it happens.
Use her as a targeted missile rather than the sort of scatter approach, because actually one thing the Queen doesn't do, as we said before, is rush to microphones, give broadcasts and statements all the time, because when she does do it, it shows that it is very serious and it represents the grave nature of the situation that we're in.
And it's also, because she speaks so rarely and does these addresses so rarely, it therefore holds more power, and is.
I'm with you. I don't think a decision's been made on this in Buckingham Palace, and they will sort of keep their powder dry, if you like, and save that one possibly for some time, because we're on the upward curve. You look at what's happened in Italy, what's happening in Spain at the moment, and if we are in that sort of situation in 2 weeks' time, that's the point at which to deploy, to use your verb, the Queen.
And I think everything the royal family are doing is being done in conjunction with the government. I mean, if you take the visit from Kate and William going to the 111 centre, that visit, the embargo will have been thought about very carefully around not diluting any government messaging that day. If there had been a big announcement that day, they might have considered holding it for another day. And the same with the Queen. That will have been done in conjunction with government and making sure that, they are at no point not working together.
Now, this is the point of the podcast where we normally do Robinson's Royal what's the one where we look ahead? Recap.
We've always slightly struggled with her.
Robinson's Royal whatever. But actually there's nothing to say. There's nothing in the diary. No one's doing anything. Queen's at Windsor, Charles is in Scotland, William and Kate are in Norfolk. End of. Yeah?
They're doing what we're all doing, which is staying at home and hopefully staying safe.
Okay, and on that note is probably where we will leave you. Thank you for continuing to tune in. We know you are. In fact, you've probably got perhaps more time to tune into these things at the moment than you might ordinarily have. But as you well know by now, available as a podcast, also on YouTube. And we just thank you for continuing to watch. They're difficult times, they're challenging times for everyone, no matter where you are in the world, even though there are particular hotspots. But all we can say from both of us to all of you is keep well, keep safe, and we will see you next week.